quite a roll up today. Did you get the questions I sent, Mark?
I did, Peter. I got a whole pile of them. Some are quite big and complex, so
Yeah.
I don't promise that we'll get through everything, but hopefully we'll get through some of the bits and pieces. And do we have any other mentors online? I know Kyle Hill was talking about trying to get here on time.
I'm not sure, Mark. I don't think so.
Look. Okay. Hopefully we'll see a couple of others on. So first thing I need to do is share my screen and go for an infinity share, which it hates. And there we go, to the infinity and back. And then we want to have a look at the emails. Okay. So some really great stuff has come through, and I'll go in order that things have come in. Vicky, we dealt with your brachychiton question last time, didn't we? Yeah, mic's off, sorry. Mic's off, Vicky. Hello, Vicky. Let me just check. I'm pretty sure
we did, yeah. I remember talking about brachychitons. We can...
Oh, yeah, I had to take it out because it had a broken irrigation pipe under it.
Yeah, look, brachychiton, no, we didn't talk about it. I don't think we did.
Okay.
Brachychiton is a species of tree that has, it's a magnificent plant, but it has a really good strength. The good strength is it's got lots of living cells, and it can have living cells that are, decades old and potentially more than decades old. But it has one drawback. It's got lots of living cells. And so when things go wrong with brachychiton, they go wrong because things tend to take advantage of those cells that are pathogenic, and they cause lots of problems. So once areas start to die off, like you see here, things do go wrong with them quite rapidly. Having said that, there are specimens out there well over 100 years of age. So if you take good care of them, they're pretty good plants. So, but the thing to keep in mind is that parenchyma, the living cells, are good at defending themselves, but when they go, they're bad after that. So if you get a pathogen, pathogens kill living cells, it really does knock the hell out of those that rely on lots of living cells. Very quickly, you see stuff rot away like you're seeing here. So one of those unfortunate faults with that sort of growth pattern. So can I ask about topping or lopping of Cupressus sempervirens? You can ask about anything you like. Vicky, topping them. Look, first of all, I'll break all the rules by saying topping or lopping, cutting the top out of a tree, is less problematic when it comes to gymnosperms than angiosperms. And a part of the reason for that is gymnosperms produce compression wood, so they produce those lovely little sweeping curves that you see in the tortured forest of Poland. You see those lovely curves. That's the compression wood doing its job. Angiosperms aren't so lucky in general. Some angiosperms do produce compression wood. Some produce tension wood and some produce nothing. So angiosperms are a whole different deal. So how do I feel about it? I'd rather have 2/3 of a tree than no tree. But unless there's a good reason to get rid of it or reduce it down, then I'd say no. The question here, to prevent fruit from falling into the gutters, that may be an acceptable thing. We typically hedge cypress on a regular basis. And if you go over to New Zealand, really tall hedges, 6, 8 meter high hedges are quite frequent. So cutting it back to that height, not the end of the world.
Okay. They just wanted to know would they die or not.
And oh no, they won't die. You'll end up with a dead patch in the middle if you looked at them from the air.
Yes.
Because they have very few latent buds.
Okay.
Well, they produce quite a few. It's just that they are very short-lived, and so you lose all your meristematic traces. You lose any capacity to regenerate, and so it takes a while for that that hollow to fill back in. Once it fills back in, you can get up there on a hedging platform and hedge them all day long,
Okay.
and you can have a canopy that's only 5 centimeters thick when it's at its peak.
Okay.
There's a really good, there's a great hedge in Mossman, Mana capressus. I think Capressus oparus, whatever that's been called now. But it would only be a 300 mil wide hedge. I'll see if I can pull up an image of it from Street View. It's if you're in Sydney, it's worthwhile going and having a look at. But it shows you what you can get. The thing that makes it a great hedge is that it's been done 3 to 4 times a year.
Okay.
That really does make a phenomenal difference. I'm pretty sure my little man will come in about here. So this is the hedge here. It's really going bad since I've seen it, saw it last. One of the things they're doing wrong is they're letting the top get wider and they're cutting in lower at the bottom. Ideally, you would take that the other way. Ideally, you'd have it slightly narrower at the top, and that's for light. But you can see, I don't know, probably a 15, 20-year-old specimen, something like that. Not quite as nice as it used to be, but still fairly good. And you can see the density of that hedge when you look at it here. So yeah, I'm not against it, Vicky. A consent authority maybe.
Yeah.
And I know if we're looking at, for example, Sydney Council has a goal to lose no canopy. So hedging it wouldn't be something that they would accept on probability.
So would these clients have to apply for approval to prune trees like that?
Depending on what the development control plan says for each council, and not one of them is consistent with another. So every single council is a thing. So the way to do that is to go look up the development control plan for that council, find which section contains trees and read that section, and then look for also the exempt species.
Yeah.
If it's an exempt species, you can do whatever you like. If it's, for example, Kringai will allow you to remove any tree within where its trunk, the center of its trunk is within 3 meters of a structural wall, which this hedge would be. By the sounds of things, your capressus would, in which case they're not protected, and you can treat them like they're your own, and you can do whatever you like. If you're in, as I said, if you're in Sydney Council, I'm pretty sure you'll find that you'd have to get consent, and that's probably not likely to be forthcoming.
Yeah. Okay.
So
the previous question that I had with the brachychiton had a couple of other questions in that message.
Okay, I've got it here still. Thanks.
Yeah.
So perch water table, maybe. Again, lots of living, and so living doesn't do well without oxygen, so it could be, but
this tree here is an Angophora, and I'm just wondering, do you think that looks like it's been poisoned?
Hard to say from that distance. But what we want to look for, and I'll show you a picture. Pretty sure I can do it. Russell Lee Public School. Of sublethal poisoning. Well, I can show you that anyhow from another. I've got it in here already. But if you look here, see how this jacaranda leaf is distorted? It's okay. That is a typical symptom of sublethal poisoning, as is the little clustering suckers that you see coming up. Lots of these little shortened nodes. And if I look for here, I'll do it. I should be able to do poison. What's on? So these are all poisoning shots. It's just, unfortunately, so this clustering of the foliage and these meristematic traces start dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing. Typical sign of a number of our herbicides, lethal levels. Again, you can see the same thing here. And I'm going to guess that's probably even Russell Lee last year information. No, it's not telling me. So again, you can see this little clustering of buds. Okay, so that's a really good giveaway. That can be, doesn't have to be, when we say poisoned, I'm not meaning to infer that somebody has gone out and said, let me kill this tree. Rather, the tree has received a dose that's been problematic. And so these can be accidental as much as anything else. When you see drill holes, I have a different view. So
there's a few
here, for
dead trees
example,
on the neighbouring property.
yeah, here you can see the spray pattern. And so the person applying the herbicide also hit the trees. Another thing you get is interference with the photosynthetic system. And so you get this chlorotic look. So that's another thing to keep an eye out. Now, chlorosis in itself is not necessarily an indication. So chlorosis is when we get the dark green veins and everything else goes to a pale color. There are other things that cause that as well as poisoning, but poisoning is one of those things. So it's worthwhile keeping that in mind. And again, I can just show you dozens of photographs of the same sort of thing. This is glyphosate poisoning, Roundup Zero. The client emptied out the container underneath the tree when they finished doing a spray. And so it wasn't intentional, sublethal. I can't show you that because you don't know who that is, but that company had lots of problems. Sulfurin leak. And the metsulfurin ended up causing lots and lots of problems. And you can see that same pattern of stunted, rapidly dividing foliage. And that's because it's affecting the hormonal systems of the plant.
Yep.
Okay. So better shot, and you'd have a better shot of answering that. And
and there was one more question on that.
Yep. Thank you. I'll get to that. Again, showing you the same thing. This is chlorosis from dicamba poisoning. So this is sublethal. Most of those trees survived, but they added too much dicamba underneath the canopy of the trees, and you can see had all sorts of problems with it. So my advice, if you're using those herbicides that once a year weed feeds, those sort of things, to keep in mind that the soil needs to be really moist before you follow a treat, and try not to apply any of them underneath the canopy of a tree. And every November, it's a great money earner. Every November, 2 or 3 people trying to get the lawns ready for Christmas will go out, spray underneath their tree. It'll be a hot day. The soil will be dry. The afternoon, the rain comes, washes it into the root system, and we have one of those accidental sublethals. Okay, the next one that you've got there, let me go back to that. Okay.
The client wants to keep the palm and they want to remove the eucalypt. Is that possible?
I would hope so. I would hope there are lots of good arborists out there that would have no troubles working their way around that palm tree and not damaging it. But let me just go to one young fella, Niels. Matthew, either of you two want to take that on in terms of, do you see any problems with getting rid of that palm, getting rid of the tree and retaining the palm without damaging the palm?
No, that looks straightforward.
Yep, just good rigging, good work habits. Really easy to achieve.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. And we'll come back to some of those questions. There's some horrible questions there. We'll go across to our emails. Okay.
Did you see David's question in the chat first, Mark?
No, I haven't seen David's question in the chat.
I've, I guess, tried applying sugar water to poison trees. Is that a valid treatment?
There is some work that shows there's a benefit. First thing is, if they're drilled holes, flush, sodium bicarbonate saturated, then flush again, lots of water, flush out the holes. So you want to flush out the holes at all times, anytime you can. Because these things often affect biological pathways, there's a possibility that sugar or sugar waters are of some benefit. There is a membrane protein in the roots that will take up sugar. There's good work on it, glucose or in particular rather than anything else, but glucose or sucrose. We know that the tree can take, or plants can take sugars and put them into the environment. That same protein can do the reverse as well. So I think there is, but like with all these things, dose is critical. A little bit of sugar is good. A friend of mine, Hugh Taylor, was called me up one day. He said, "Mark, I've just been out, I won't say where, and the council had a heritage Eucalyptus teraticornis that was doing poorly, and they called him back in sometime later and said, oh, it looks like it's died." And he said, yeah, well, you really don't need to have a whole bag of sugar underneath the tree. And there was this bag of sugar stored under the tree. And they said, oh, no, this is bag 20. And so what had happened is it made the sugary solution so strong that you'd had reverse osmosis, or essentially the cells were torn apart and the tree died. So a little is good, too much is too much. And there are research papers on this, so follow the research advice that you can get to ensure that you don't overdo. You are better to do numerous small doses than one big dose. Okay, so hopefully that answers that one.
Thanks, Mark.
Have we got online at the moment Colin Fry? If Colin's not on, I jump away from soil tests if I can and have a look at a whole pile of other questions. Okay, of course you're on line, Niels. Yours is the next one up. I'll just mark that one so we go back to it later on. Okay. Is this considered fibre buckling? What are your thoughts on fibre buckling in general, in particular in combination with loss tension wood? See the pictures below. So we've got this tree here that's possibly starting to give a bit, and the answer is I think it's giving structurally. I don't think it's fibre buckling, and Maddox changed his view on what fibre buckling is. So if you grab his latest encyclopedia, it's altered. in his original stuff, he suggested that the cells started to slump, and there's no questions that there could be some really minor slumping in cells, compression, change in geometry, but it's fairly limited without getting voids. So if there were voids, you would see them when you examine microscopically. Certainly you would see them at, somewhere between 200 and 400 times without any problems at all. For all the samples I've gone through, I've never found one. Mac does use a press to demonstrate what he thinks might be happening, and I suspect that it would be happening with something that was getting ready or close to failure. That is, it is less likely to be a long-term thing. Having said that, I suspect that burls are formed when you end up with the cells around the vascular tissue around a ray or a meristematic trace being pushed on and stretched. And as it stretches, the meristematic trace herniates to the other side. When it herniates to the other side, it starts to divide. It's no longer under tension. It's not being held in place. And so that's why we get a burl. And you can actually see these burl lines on trees that are loaded up. So it's an interesting thing. Now, I should be able to show you some of those. So let me see if I can do that for you.
That trace on quite a bit of an angle as well, and you can see that the wound on the back's been there for like 20, 30, 40 years. I don't know, forever.
Yeah, look, when things burn, they lose tissue rapidly, and I don't know whether fiber buckling is the only one I know of.
So that was actually an old burn from, I don't know, maybe 2006 or something.
Yeah, but it starts to weaken things out. So this is, I suspect, fiber buckling more so than congestion. And the reason I say that is this was an incredibly long branch on our microcories with lots of weight that had the weight reduced. And I suspect that things were slumping down. And I say that, just look at this prop tissue here. Rather than being where it normally be, which is straight, it's bent. Okay, so that's sort of what's happening with your wood. We're getting things starting to give. That's it for my collection. It's the one time I've seen it and thought, oh, wow, that's really exciting. I get to see it. So I suspect that if it is occurring, it's a rarity. Now, if we go to, I'm just trying to think, wine barreling, let's see if, okay, now I'll at least demonstrate one of the things that's interesting. This is Melaleuca. This particular one's Melaleuca stiphyloides. And this is natural wine barreling. And you see this on the east coast with Melaleucas, on the west coast with Agonis. And what is happening is these gaps here called sinuses, they start to get pushed apart and cracked. And as they start to push apart and crack, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the tree just holds itself up. You'd be amazed at how commonplace this is. That bit there and that bit there and that bit there were all once here in the middle. Why was the tree cut down? Had nothing to do with the wine barreling. It was just a completely unrelated incident. So just seeing if I can find the buckling. No, it's the only one I've got of it. But it's this hose pipe failure. Oh, that's where I'll find it. It'll be a hose pipe, I bet you. Or flattening failure, one of the two. Yeah. Okay. Niels. Okay. This has burnt out, which is why it's so extreme. But what's happening is the wood's just purely being loaded past what it could deal with. It will have been pushed over by now because you can see they were doing earthworks behind. But given time, it's potentially possible for the tree to develop past that and re-deal with things as it puts on more tissue. So the real question is, how quickly is the wood being removed? Okay, and this is that situation where the wall thickness, if you look up or do tree calc, the statics calculator, you'll see wall thickness is critical to failure. And here the wall thickness is too thin, and that's what's happening with your sample. Your wall thickness is getting too thin, and now it wants to buckle, it wants to give way, but it's not fiber buckling, it's actually buckling of the entire tissue. Happy with that?
Yeah, yep. So it's kind of on a larger scale, really. Than on the
and that's
cell. Yeah.
Same tree. It hasn't failed, which is just amazing. I love trees, but it's got close to it. And as I said, given that it had been left alone, it would have been a complete failure. Okay. So our next question.
The pictures for that one is in the next email. I couldn't put them all in the one email. So it's that's really burnt out. It's got a hole through the bottom of it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see how I can make that bigger for everyone. So let me just go larger.
I haven't got a picture of the whole tree, but it's huge.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much trees can stand up with. You know, this is equivalent to a loss of 1/2 of the stem. And again, what's really critical here is the geometry of the tree. So how tall it is, how much foliage it's got. And after fires, this is a real issue for us because this burns out, everything looks great.
Yeah.
3 months later, canopy starts to develop back in, and that's when you get to see failures occurring. So
you've got the path, the footpath or the walking tracks down there. You can see it.
Yeah.
And the tree's about 40 meters tall. It's a mountain grey gum. Hasn't even singed the leaves or anything. Just burnt in the bottom.
Yeah. So it's again for a period of time is going to be a increased likelihood of failure because this is potentially. I mean, what sort of diameter are we talking about here? 80 centimeters.
120.
120. So it's got a fair bit of strength at 120.
And you can see that there was an old wound there already. I'm never sure how much the actual heartwood does for the stability because you see them and you can see on the edges like the old woundwood rolls or whatever around the wound. So there's always a wound there, but it's just completely hollowed it out.
Yeah, look, and I'm just going to use a family member to find a hollow tree, if I can. That'll give you an idea, and I think I've shown it on this thing before, but, you know, this is hollow. Very little.
I think I've seen that one.
It's got about 10 centimeters just up north of Taree. And the wall thickness varies between about 25 centimeters to 10 centimeters. And so 10 centimeters is thick enough for this species not to crack. There's 300 tons of wood, about 6 meters above it turns solid. It is protected by the surrounding trees on a mountaintop, which means winds are going to be high, but the surrounding trees are giving protection. But just let you know how little wood a tree needs. Now, it's a good sized diameter as well. You know, it's probably 3.5 meters across, and it's tapered. So there's a distinct advantage if you're designing a tree. You see this tapering here. This is not the same tree. That's 4 and a bit meters across. But that tapering adds so much strength, just immense amounts.
Yeah.
And people ask me about all the time, should we have signs up warning people? And I say, yeah, look, I think that's a good idea in having signs up. And at the front of this tree, there's a sign saying, "Caution, big dead branches, parts may drop, don't cross over." And of course, I've got all my family there. It's not because I hate them. It's because the odds of it happening at that moment on a calm, still day is fairly low. I did a school risk assessment recently in from near gale force to gale force winds, and I have to say I was somewhat uncomfortable in doing it, just because of the increased likelihood of just a 50 or 100 mil dead branch or green branch falling during those conditions. So we really shouldn't be outside in those. But a calm day, who knows when it's going to fall?
It's a good time to actually do the reports, I reckon, because you can see how much the trees are moving and if cracks are opening and closing and things.
Yeah, although you don't often see cracks opening and closing. That's the rarity. So yes, it's a difficult.
So well that big tree on the picture there, from a QTRA point of view, it's got a target rating of 3, size 1, obviously, and probability of failure, I put 4 on it because it's not going to fall directly on the crack. It'll kind of fall along and then roll onto it, possibly.
Maybe.
I can't tell which way it's going to fall. Like, kind of depends on what
What
holds
the
on.
prevailing winds are doing. So yes, 3 out of 4 spots that's going to fail at is going to not necessarily impact the track, and then the other, somewhere between a third and a quarter, will impact the track. So you came out with something at 1 in 400,000.
Exactly right.
So you now can work out an equation. You can say, well, you've got $12.50 to reduce the risk associated with that tree. What can you do for $12.50? Matthew,
You
do you mind doing a removal?
Probably could sell it for that price if you're down there anyway.
Well, you probably couldn't. Even if you're charging, let's say you're charging $100 now, by the time you go to get your saw with a meter bar on it, it's got to be at least a meter long bar, and then you probably do want to have some form of control over that, even though you're screwed. You're not going to get it done for $12.50. And even if you looked at 10 years of that, $125, you're probably not going to get it removed. Then you go the other side. What's the benefit? What's the canopy spread on that tree?
It's been reduced on the path side before, actually.
So what would you say it is now? Width?
I don't know, 20 meters?
20 meters by 20 meters?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So let's just do 15 by 15 by 15 by, let's just put the value of the canopy in terms of the community at $1 a square meter. It's still $225 worth of benefits out of the tree versus your $12.50 worth of risk,
Yeah, and there's a gazillion of hollows up in it as well.
Yeah, whatever the hollows are. Yep. And there's also all the other things of environmental diversity, climate modification, carbon sequestration. All those things still need to be considered, and we just don't want to consider that.
Yeah. My biggest issue with, I know Deca would have just probably felled it, or Parks, but there's only probably about 10 or 15 of these big trees along this walk left in this gully. So obviously they're getting fewer and fewer every time there's a fire or something, because they keep getting felled.
I think that's the history of arboriculture in general. As we see trees interacting with people, bigger, older trees are going. I've certainly been involved with felling trees that my Still 090 with a 6-foot bar had troubles getting through from both sides. I look at that loss now in hindsight and think it's horrendous. They're trees that people will never see again. And, well, not in my lifetime, not in my children's lifetime, not in my grandchildren's lifetime. And then, unfortunately, as we get rid of these sort of trees, and even as we get rid of bigger trees now, local environments, the research shows, a gentleman out of Tasmania, wherever that is, Colin, did some wonderful research, and they're able to show that people are actually planting smaller growing or slower growing species, so you end up with smaller trees. So we're losing biomass, we're losing canopy, and the time to replace it is becoming almost parabolically longer. So this is an 80-year-old tree. We might be looking at, maybe a 400 or 500-year-old replacement of what they're putting back in the urban environment. So no, keeping them makes good sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I was thinking of putting signs up saying don't stop here or something. But then if you put the signs up, people will stop. So I wasn't sure what the
yeah, I think having informative signs at the beginning of a track like that saying, hey, trees are more inclined to shed parts during strong windy weather. We suggest you use caution or resist the urge to use the area during such conditions. I think that's important. And I think it's important because you would think that people think, but people don't.
No.
The average person knows that trees fail during windy weather, but they just don't put the two together.
Yeah.
And I'm
even when they see stuff falling down in the car park, they'll still go for the walk.
Well, I had it today. I had a branch failed over the weekend in a park beside a school. The park is actually owned by the Department of Education, so there's questions as to who's responsible for cleaning it up. But the principal was quite distraught that, this tree had dropped a branch and another tree in the back of the school had dropped a branch, until she gets a report from an arborist saying that it's okay to open that back up to kids. The kids can't go in there. And, I've got Jessica in the office saying to the principal, look, we know the branch failed in strong winds. Would you let the kids out in that sort of winds? No. Well, then, you've just got to put your thinking cap on. And people, as I said, find that very difficult. So this is a crack that's generating down the stem here. It looks like it's had.
Yeah, you can actually see straight through the branch. That doesn't really bad, sorry, but and it's sort of trying to deal with it. It's been there for I would say a few years at least. It's the windward's kind of rolling over the crack.
Yeah, look.
But it's very big. Like it's more than 450. The branch itself, and you can see it's like the main union on the whole tree is just to the left of the left picture. So it's up there, up high. Yeah. So it's quite a big piece. The footpath's on the other side, but it'll probably hang on or something and swing onto.
We don't know what it's going to do, but we're not there to try and predict what's going to happen. We're there to say what's likely to happen.
Yeah.
There's always the chance that something's going to break, come down, bounce back. If it's calm weather, it breaks. A person's got at least a bit of time to respond and get out of the way. Has everyone seen what happens when a big redwood tree fails in a forest and you hear the crashing and the crunking? There's a great video of a guy running from it and then getting out his phone, turning around and videotaping the last half of the tree hitting the ground. So he's got it from about 5 degrees onwards. In other words, in normal weather, we can respond fairly quickly and fairly well. In rainy, wet weather, wind blowing, really hard to respond, whether you're driving or whether you know how hard it is when you're driving to just keep focus on the road when the wind's coming down and everything's blowing around. It's exactly the same when you're walking. I would like to say that if a storm's coming through, you would like to think that national parks, recreational reserves like this would just have a sign up saying, hey, think about not using a facility or facility closed. I remember my youngest daughter being in Hawaii, and the forecast came through of gale force winds or walking a ridge top, and she said to her newly married husband, "Hey, I'm turning around and going back. It is just now at the point to where I know I shouldn't be out here." And I think we've lost that. I think we've lost that as a society as a whole. You know, a good old farmer who's seen dozens of branches drop in his days would say to his son, "Son, stay indoors today." That's gone. No common sense. In fact, what we get is, well, I'm driving down a road, it's the government's fault. If the government hadn't bloody done its job, then I'm going to sue them. You know, and I find that sort of ludicrous. It's likewise, I find I'm going to park underneath the tree because I like the shade. I know trees drop branches. If it drops a branch, I want to sue somebody, but I'll take the shade for free. And people don't think there's the yin and the yang. At least in most other states now, in Victoria, things are different. Most other states, the person who parks under a tree that knows that trees drop branches, which is pretty well everybody, they participate in the risk. And so the consent authority is allowed, or the councils are allowed to say, "Oh, that was tough luck, wasn't it? Claim it against your insurance." And realistically, that's where it falls. You know, if your car gets hit by hail, you don't go to the council and complain. If your car's protected from hail damage by a tree over, you don't pay the council anything. So the whole thing's the same way. What would I do with that? It's difficult. Some low reduction makes sense, but foliage is required to add new tissue and add strength. So you've got to weigh those two things. The only other thing you could do is potentially install some form of a catcher, a rope that's just tied so that if it does go past the point of no return, it's held up in the tree. You know, I don't think
Not a bad idea.
installing a brace would be over the top.
Yeah. Yep. I think so you can see just above the crack there's a dead stub.
Yeah.
So all the wood on the top side of the crack is actually dead, and all the stuff that's alive is underneath. But basically, all the tension wood is just dead. You can kind of see where the white.
Eucalypts, so wood under tension and not necessarily tension wood. So the wood under tension is dead. We don't know whether it's got tension wood or not. Eucalypts are one of those wonderful groups. Some produce tension wood, some don't.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I know that somebody at some stage or other will work out where that isn't a phylogenetic tree. But as to date, no one's done that. So it's just a sample by sample by sample going out and finding whether it produces tension wood or not. But yes, look, the tree's trying to deal with it. Not ideal. You know, if it falls and it falls onto a spot where there's no track, does it really matter? Probably not. If it falls and bounces back, it's an issue. What to do? It's likely to fall on nothing on averages, but it could cause some harm. You've got to take that as a part of the risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna go up and have a look and then do some weight reduction if it was safe enough to go out there, but.
Yeah, I think if I was going to do that and I couldn't get a good high spot above this, it'd have to be a good high spot, and it doesn't look like we're going to get there because we're here, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. My answer to you would be EWP only.
It's like 600 meters down a walking track.
Yeah. So
across a bridge and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it then becomes come in and take out back to this union here potentially, stub it maybe a metre or so above, turn it into a hollow, go from there. But, how often's that track used?
It's 5.5 pedestrians per hour annually. So
is that per hour, 24 hours a day?
Yeah, so target rating 3.
Target range 3. That's quite a heavy load. I wouldn't have thought
Yeah, it's one of the busier ones in the main national park. So,
And the size of our park, you said, was 450.
yeah, it's probably bigger. Like 450 plus for sure.
Okay, so
So
size.
that's another 40-meter tree, that one.
Yeah, look, I think you're getting towards that low end of tolerability, so the bigger end of it, the nasty end of it. So you may merit doing something.
But my only thing was, I was looking at it, I'm thinking, no, it would have been there for, I don't know, looking at the woundwood, probably 5 years or something.
Yeah, no, look, the dilemma is we don't know, and so there's got to be some degree of uncertainty in that. There's not a lot of load because of the diameter there versus the diameter here, but just going the reverse of what you've got in that other one, you've got a C that wants to open up. So as the C has load going on, it wants to flatten, and as it flattens, it gets weaker.
Yeah.
So, given time, again, I think the best thing, and I think it's something we need to get into a habit of as a society, of saying, hey, national parks have some risk associated with them. The use of these areas comes with accepting that risk. If someone got bitten, not that it happens anywhere near as often as trees, if someone got bitten by a snake, you're not going to go around to the national parks and say, hey, you need to check all the tracks to make sure there's no snakes on them.
Yeah.
We're just craziness that we go through. Okay, well, that answers that one. Now we get to
Thanks, mate.
My pleasure. A horrible question by Colin Fry. Yeah, horrible, Colin. I read the stuff. So I'll go to them. Okay. So Colin's got an area that's getting replanted out with trees. And soil has been sent for testing, sent to Sydney Environmental and Soil Lab. And they've done a whole pile of really interesting things. So airfill porosity 4.9%, that's fairly low. Water holding capacity 38.5, that's so. Saturated bulk density 1.66, fairly high for what it is. Dry bulk density is 1.22. And from what I can gather, Colin, it's a sand with some loam in it. Would that be right? A fairly good sandy loam?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, okay. And it's got some interesting.
Very compact, though. It's silty.
Yeah. And it's got some chemical. So it's gonna want to get to saturation point and flood out all the holes. So, and you've been charged with finding out suitable trees to plant in that range, and so they've given you already some hints with that, and I agree with their hints, which is riparian zone trees, things that are going to tolerate getting flooded, melaleucas, casuarinas, the riparian or riverine species, things that will grow near really wet zones.
What's the rationale behind that, given that it's actually quite a dry area?
Yeah, so a lot of the trees that grow in that area, let's look at Callistemon viminalis, gets fairly dry. I've got a photograph of it in the middle of the Grafton River, in a dry region within it's dried out. But I also know that river went over the top of that tree for several days at a time. And so it's going to get flooded. And when it gets flooded, it stops the movement of water, it slows the whole process down. When it's dry, it does exactly the same thing. So riparian species are often tolerant of dry because they're on flats that get dry. Make sense? That's one of the reasons why many of the species of Melaleuca really do adapt well to urban environments. Oddly enough, rainforest species do the same. Okay, so long as you can get past their minimum moisture requirements, they're quite tolerant again. And even you look at something like brushbox. We grow brushbox in environments that's a third of the rainfall of what it grows best in, but it still tolerates without too many problems. Ficus is another one. And a lot of our ficus will tolerate 2,400 mils a year, and yet, you know, you see them out at Ningen, of all weird places, you know. Why? Because they can cope with dry. They've developed systems to deal with dry, because in a rainforest, when it gets too wet, the root system stops taking up water again. We get that drying problem. That's the housewife dilemma. I can show you in the office. I bought a lovely little plant for the girls in the office about 3 weeks ago. I can show you the dead pot. As soon as it looked like it was weeping, starting to wilt, on with the water, and the water went on until the thing was drowned to death. And that drowning is not, in this case, suffocation by, you know, putting it under completely. It's that the root system stops taking up water, and so it starts to wilt. Water everywhere and not a drop to drink. So that's the logic behind using species that tolerate those ranges. Don't ask me to think of a whole pile, because at the top of my head, Melaleuca is probably the easiest that I can think of, followed by Casuarina. But there are lots of others that fit into that group.
This is on the rationale that the hole that it's put in isn't going to drain when it gets watered. Is that where we're coming at?
There are going to be times when it gets saturated and times when it gets bone dry, and it's got to be able to deal with those two extremes. And so plants in those environments have developed several different mechanisms to deal with it. And whichever the method they're using, it doesn't matter, they're dealing with it. Whereas if you went and put, well, you know, liquid amber is another one that fits that riparian zone that may take it. I'm trying to think of something that would hate it. I wouldn't try and grow Physofolia in it. And I might be wrong with that, but Corymbia Physofolia, I think, would really have troubles with it. And that's because Corymbias in general don't like really wet roots. In general, there
Just
are
on a
some.
tangent, what's the physiological response we're looking at from those roots? I mean, if they're responding to drought, my perception is that they got stomatal closure. What's this response to excess moisture?
Excess moisture. They gate the aquaporins, and then they've got so there's a membrane protein called an aquaporin. It takes in water. So to get into the living part of the plant, the symplastic part, you've got to come from the apoplast and break that membrane barrier. There's a zone called a Casparian strip. It's a waxy zone that stops the water from doing that. And so to get into the root, it's got to get into the living part of it. It's got to get to the aquaporin. Only when it does that can it get into the conductive stuff on the inside. It then comes out of the living part of the cell, back into apoplast and into the vascular tissue, which are dead cells. Okay. So gating is one thing, but if you gate and you don't have oxygen, then you've got problems. So two possibilities exist. Changing the way that you handle your respiration is one option. So a slightly different metabolic approach. The second one is to transport air in other ways. So if you go look at ficus, moraceae, often they'll have really large lenticels, and they'll have large lenticels even in the roots, and that's in part to allow for gaseous exchange. If you go to the Amazon, that's one of the things you'll see is lots of plants with lenticels. I've got a white sapote on my driveway, and it's got lenticels just beyond belief. You know, it just hates getting dry, but loves getting really wet. I don't think, you know, I think if I could irrigate it for 4 hours a day, it'd probably just sit there and say, well, that's nice. So that's the logic behind that. Does it help? Okay. The next thing we get is an EC test for sodium and chlorine. Within broad range, that's not an issue. pH is not an issue. Then we get down to soil chemistry. And this is where it
There's
starts to get
4
interesting.
different samples here I sent in. So
It's it's sad. And the natural inclination for me as an arborist in Sydney is to want to add organic matter. Okay. For
the
me as an
interesting
arborist,
thing was they said that there's very high organic matter content. That was the
4%
bit
in one of the
sort of
samples,
baffled me.
yeah. But that's down low. I want it up top. I want to start producing clays. I want to start getting soil life going. I want things to aerate it. So I want digging organisms. And what's interesting is, and it's really difficult, this is a available nutrient chart based on a chemical model. Chemical models and biological models don't align well. So if you are looking at a high organic layer in the top of your soil, the soil starts to change its behavior. And so it's going to alter these components. Interesting here, zinc is getting close to being critically high. That is going to be a little bit of a problem. But the way these things interact is so complex. There's a great lecture by Kim Coder available on it's available on the ISA's podcasts. It's from Parramatta, Australia, on soil chemistry. And by the end of that 45-minute lecture, I realized that trying to mess with this stuff is really difficult. Because copper can, for example, stand in terms of other chemicals and vice versa. So we really have problems in getting it exactly right. And then we get things like phosphorus. And here, we're not looking at the phosphorus. Here, we're looking at the phosphates, I'm assuming. But maybe not. I'm thinking he's got it as P, but I'm imagining it's a phosphate that he's looking at. Phosphorus in the soil is immobile. Phosphates are highly mobile. And fungi are responsible for a lot of the uptake of phosphates because they can take phosphorus, enzymatically break it down into a phosphate, make it mobile, and then move it. So organics start to alter the entire thing all over again. And so when I look at things like this, I say, yep, I agree, need some nitrogen. Could do with a little bit of sulfur, but that's going to make it more acidic. Could do with some more iron, more manganese. So you can adjust these things. You could adjust it by a specific mix. If you ask Cecil, they'll give you a specific mix. It's hard work because trying to buy these things is difficult. So the generalized recommendation they've given you, I think, is a reasonable recommendation. And then I'd say an organic layer, mulch layer over the top. Somewhere between 10 and 15 centimeters thick is probably appropriate. The other thing, and I don't know the answer to this again, Colin, is deep planting. And there's really good work done on deep planting, and I'm not sure how you would deal with that in this area. But for example, Melaleucas like being deep planted. They don't have a problem with it. And I can't remember what I was doing, but I was watching a documentary recently, and there was deep planting occurring. In the regreening of Africa, the Sahara Green Wall. There's a green wall being constructed to try and stop the spread of the Sahara Desert, and they were deep planting everything. Mind-boggling. And I've mentioned that before. You go to Vietnam, deep planting is commonplace. How good or successful it is on bigger stuff is dubious, but on smaller stuff, there's definitely benefits to it. if you can buy the stock. That's the other thing. You want, stock that's already got half a metre or a metre of clear trunk to do deep planting. But yes, pretty nasty soil, and you've got at different depths and different samples, horrible results. Sorry, I have to laugh because it is funny.
Quite acidic, some of them.
Yeah, it's acidic, and yet look at the sulfur levels. Very low levels of sulfur. Your nitrogen level, if you're going to get plant growth, you've got to get past that. So you're going to have to increase your nitrogen level. And so they suggested a nitram thing, potassium nitrate. After 911, I stopped mixing my own. I should go down and say, I'd like a 20 kilogram bag of potassium nitrate. And then the police would be there to talk to you. But yes, that's horrendous. And it just reads here like this is almost just a pure non-organic minerals sand combination, which is pretty harsh to deal with. There could be benefit from the bulk density, by the way, of looking at doing a deep rip, depending on what's there and not there for services, but running along with a reasonably good horsepower and ripping to half a metre or a metre in depth will make a fairly big difference in terms of how it performs. And organic material will do the other half of that. So you start to introduce organic material, the microorganisms, particularly if you start doing things like logs, just even a log sort of so wide, down occasionally, it's things like your beetle larvae, your wood roaches, your termites, all going to help cultivate that soil and help increase the porosity. What you can't do is you can't cultivate it because you're just going to create a plow pan and destroy the entire texture of the soil. You want to try and keep the soil. So the idea or concept of a rip is just to break a line through the soil or a couple of lines through the soil. If you're doing it on a broad acre, you'd cross rip. You'd do it probably at metre intervals and probably down a metre or 2 metres just to try and get it to break apart. So yes, horrible soils. And so strongly acidic. It's just going to be a miserable process to try and remove back out. So again, think about the trees that grow in that sort of horrible environment in the marshy areas, in the Melucca quinquenerva is just great. It'll grow on acid sulfate soils or grow above them and tolerate them. Boron levels are low.
Street trees.
Boron's a horrible chemical because it's in such low levels that you really risk overdoing it. But trying to elevate that will improve flowering and fruiting to start off with. I would keep away from proteaceae because I just think you need to get the phosphorus up as well. Plants use phospholipids and plants use adenosine triphosphate, two really critical things to the plant. And, both of those, the nitrogen and the phosphorus is just way low. And again, your zinc is high, and zinc at high levels is phytotoxic. So not there yet, but it's getting close to it. And hence why getting microorganisms in there is useful. Think about plants also that have nitrogen fixing qualities. So acacias, some of the casuarinas or allocasuarinas, things that produce nodules. Fabaceae, they may have some benefits, even if it's short term, even if it's putting in a crop in between just to try and naturally increase your nitrogen levels. But yeah, I would hate to be working with it. So I commend you for your courage, because that's going to be some hard work. And I would expect, and I think you need to make sure your customer expects there to be failures, because it's not a simple straightforward situation. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, so the planting is, partially determined by the tree pit, I guess, and they've already stated that they're willing to invest quite a lot in the size of the tree pits, the strata vaults and all this sort of stuff, which is probably not necessary, but
if you're going to use strata vaults, make sure you've got positive drainage out of them. There's got to be a way for excess water to escape.
For any tree pit with this type of soil, potentially.
Yeah, it's the same as the clays of Sydney. You put a big planting pit in the clays in Sydney. I did it. 2 cubic meter one for Magnolia grandiflora that I gave my wife for one Christmas, and I watched the Magnolia grandiflora float. It filled up the pit, and it stayed full, and it continued to rain. I pumped it out, I pumped it out, I pumped it out, pumped it out, and I finally gave up. I went and got a new tree. So yes, it's going to be a difficult process. If I had a choice, I would go to tube stock and I'd mass plant and try not to be regular. But whatever you do in a vault, it has to drain, because you're going to have a whole interface issue going on that's going to play all sorts of little tricks on your soil. Your trees will get to a medium size, and then they may or may not break past that interface. It'll be interesting to see whether they do and how long it takes them. And adding organic material will at least be of some assistance in getting that soil to be cultivated.
I would assume that focusing on that barrier would be a really important part of the tree pit, so that, mixing
interface. Yeah, look, in a perfect world, you'd transition it, and it's really hard to do. You would try and start with mostly your backfill medium and maybe 20% or 30% site soil, transitioning it the other way to 70% site soil, 30% medium, to try and break down that barrier. And what you don't want is a strict, perfect line, but you'll find that some of that will occur just regardless when you're installing the stuff. It's a difficult one. But as I said, part of the solution is at least making sure you don't end up with it turning into a swamp. So if you can get a line out to stormwater, that's great. The counter side to that is your pit soil will probably be better draining, and that means you're going to be wasting water if you're not careful, because it'll want to drain away, go into the pit drain and disappear. And that's one of the problems that we've got down at the Olympic site, where we moved the Ficus microcarpa hillii in along the main boulevard there, and that's probably halved their growth rate. They just really, it's not been a great solution to the problem. Now they're using structural soils there, but it's the same process. You lose water. Remember, water is going to be one of your big limiting factors. When it's dry, it's going to be reducing it. When it's wet, it's going to be reducing it. So you're going to spend very little time in the ideal Goldilocks zone. Okay. Any questions arising out of any of that? I know it's not specific, and I'm not giving you taxodium is another one that comes to mind. Taxodium. Sorry?
One of my favorite trees.
Yeah, well, there we are.
I wanted a deciduous tree anyways.
Yeah, there's a neat little tree that's incredibly tolerant. Not going to be affected if you use a phosphate fertilizer. And as I said, I'd be just so inclined to want to. And maybe you can do some interplanting with some shorter acacias to start getting nitrogen built up in your soil, using some mulch. But again, Metasequoia is tolerant of a lot of really horrible conditions. Grows in relatively dry conditions quite remarkably, and in wet conditions. Where do I see it in dry? You see it in Texas. And as you get around Dallas, it's lower rain here than here, and it's equally as miserable on occasions. You've got slightly higher rainfall, and you've got cooler temperatures than Texas, so your water demand is going to be lower. So if that's a species that might work, certainly look good architecturally, and you could sell them on the is it micronatum, the really big taxodium, the one that's 15 meters in circumference, or whatever it is. Have you heard of that? The cypress of Chul. Let me show you a picture of it.
Oh yes, please do.
My daughter has all these spots that I'd like to see, and she's just crossing them off her list. But
Montezuma cypress.
yeah, from Owata. That's it there. It's enormous. It's just a magnificent tree.
Yeah, wow.
What do they give us about the trunk? Trunk diameter. Circumference is 42 meters. Right? Yeah, pretty amazing. And my daughter says, what's really amazing, there's better protection of this tree than there is of a lot of their Spanish museums and old archaeological things. And so they should
As
be.
there should be.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If you ever go to Washington, D.C., the park police carry sidearms. And I think, yep, maybe we should have arborist tree management officers issued with a sidearm. Arborists would be a little bit more compliant anyhow. So, yeah. No, I don't suggest you use that, by the way. But distinctum would be fine.
Why
Colin,
not
can
this
I
one?
ask how big this site is that you're working on?
Yep, I can answer that. It's actually a succession plan of about 40 Pinus radiata. So it's probably 1.5 kilometers.
Okay.
The radiators are growing well there.
Trying to convince a client to do soil testing for a 14-hectare site down at Marulan. And I had a quote, and it was just under $5,000 if I collect the samples. So,
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
yeah.
I paid $2,500 for those 4 samples, which I
Yeah.
didn't price in. I just decided, I think I priced $600. I was rudely disturbed by that.
Everything is more expensive, and arborists need to be more expensive. It's to give you an example. I was speaking to a friend the other day. I won't name names, but he had a young trainee working for him, and his young trainee said, "Well, look, I've got a job now, working for a council." And my friend said, "But you don't have a diploma in arboriculture." He said, "No, but I'll get one eventually. I'm studying." And the council, and it's a Sydney-based council, said, "We don't care. If you are studying at the moment, even if you're a first yearer, we'd still consider you." And my son's just gone for a job with a more regional council, and their view was, if you get a job with us, we'll get you trained. Don't worry about whether you've got your diploma at this stage. We'll get you into a course somewhere and get you trained, because we can't get arborists. So now is the time where we need to start realizing that our worth is increasing, just as the value of fuel is increasing, electricity is increasing, rents are increasing, arborists need to be increasing. And it's a great time to be an arborist. Wonderful time to be an arborist. Because there is a shortage, and and we're now becoming more and more valued and appreciated. So yes, and I always get shocked by services, and you realise, well, maybe I don't charge enough for what I do. Maybe I need to charge significantly more. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Any other questions? Peter, are there any questions online? Because I'm operating one computer, hard to deal with another one.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
There's a
Dom's
Dom, there's your hand raised.
Yeah, so I was finding the mic button. When you say any more questions, are you talking about the soil topic
From the floor.
specifically, or in general?
You can go in general question. We've got 12 minutes or so that I'm happy to talk about anything from the floor.
I think we can answer this one pretty quickly. I've recently done a couple of site inspections, and I'm giving them a low, medium, high, and urgent. But yeah, we all know urgent's pretty self-explanatory. Low, medium, high priority for work, recommended work. And what I wanted to ask is, when we're setting our timeframes for recommended work, should we be basing them off an approved resource as opposed to coming up with our own? Like, if I were to specify low priority for this for work is say between 12 and 24 months, for example, is it from a court point of view, because that's where all our reports could end up. From a court point of view, if I said I chose 12 to 24 months because that's what I deem fit for this site and the scope of works, or should I be saying I've chosen 12 to 24 months as low because of these already proven models? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yep, and I'll give you an answer to that.
I'd appreciate it.
Yep, no, and I have a fairly strong view of it, so I apologise for being a strong view on it.
No,
I think
either way.
arborists do all sorts of silly things. And obviously, these are my words. You have to figure out what you want to do in terms of your wording, but I'll make it really big so it's easy to see. I only have a few categories, no times. You are the client. You've got your resources. You've got your priorities. I don't know what they are. Yes, I want you to do this rather than fix the nuclear power station that's looking. Go ahead and do my tree work, because I mean, it's really important. The nuclear power plant's only going to wipe out half of Sydney. I'm not there to make those decisions. I'm just there to say this work is essential. It is stuff that we'd need to address under the Work Health and Safety Act. Okay, essentially. Work required to reduce risk or uncertainty where a tree is or may be in the unacceptable range or tolerable range and not as low as reasonably practicable. So that's stuff that I call essential. Secondary, implement where resources are available, risk is currently broadly acceptable or tolerable in ALUP, but is likely to increase within a few inspection cycles. How many is a few? 2, 3, 4? Okay. So It's something that, again, it's okay at the moment, but it makes sense to deal with it. And oddly enough, I don't even put a lot in that category. Most of the stuff that we want to have done is maintenance. Well, maintenance is driven by two things. One is the importance of the tree. You know, what happens if I don't do this? What's going to happen to the tree? The other thing is what may happen in terms of risks, putting it up into that secondary or essential work stage. And my experience has been most things don't go from maintenance up into the essential. Most people deal with them as maintenance. So a dead tree, for example, almost never goes into essential. You know, it's dead, it's going to drop progressively bigger stuff. Now I get to a school and it's dropping 15 centimetre dead branches. You know, we're back up into the essential category pretty quickly. Then it's up to them to decide. Monitor, of course, is what we're doing. We're going back and so it's just recorded for us so that we can find things. And then
Yeah.
advisory is something that, and nowadays we do half of this. So, for example, again, I'm not sure what you've got where you are, but where we are, we have Snap Send Solve. Snap Send Solve is an app. If I've got a problem with a council tree, I report it to the council. And
Oh,
so
yeah,
then we
yeah.
say to
I know
the
what you
client,
mean.
I have reported this, and we do it all digitally. It's my office can do it, I can do it. So that's how I view timeframes. There's not a single timeframe in there.
That's a really good point. I do appreciate that.
So inspection cycles, the other half of that, how often should you inspect? Well, that depends on the trees, but trees tend to change either rapidly during storms or otherwise slowly.
Yeah.
And I never say to a client, look, get me back after every severe wind event because I need to re-inspect the trees. Instead, I have a little phrase down here. And again, please use your own, but the concept is there. After weather events that cause trees or tree parts to fail on the property or nearby properties, the tree should be inspected by a responsible adult for signs of. Now, I've been asked what a responsible adult is, and my answer to that person was clearly not you. You're not able to make a decision that's grown up, so you're out of the deal. Somebody else. What you look for? Broken limbs that are caught up in the trees and fresh splits and cracks in the stems or larger branches and signs of any tree moving in the ground, such as heaving or radial cracking of soil. And then particular attention should be paid to the trees in the register that we've given them. So we've already told them the trees that we think are the ones that we want to watch more, so they should watch them more too.
Yeah.
Other than that, I've got schools that I'd be happy to inspect every 5 years. I've got a caravan park that I do every 5 years. I think that's all that it needs. I know that there are those out there that'll say to you, oh, best management practices every year, but the ISA BMP doesn't say that. And I say anyone who says, oh, we should be doing it every tree in higher use areas every year is clearly someone who's scamming it.
In Canberra, there's a lot of schools that get us in every year, just part of their budget.
Yep. And unfortunately, the director of public schools in Canberra then became the director of public schools in New South Wales. Bridget Wright had a branch killer, and same response in Northern Territory. Aidan Bott had a tree fall on him. He died. My condolences to his family. A horrible thing. And those trees are inspected twice a year. So I think that's over the top from my side.
Yeah.
I get concerned when we suggest that we're good at it. And here's why. I think I mentioned before, we're looking for somewhere between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 10,000 trees being in that tolerable and not up to unacceptable level. I'm only really worried about one tree in every 1,000 I see. That's really not a big number, is it? I mean, it's a big number of trees, but so why, when I did a school today with 60 trees, why would I want to inspect it every year? It just seems grossly disproportionate.
I think if you're going to recommend something as in work needs to be done, you've got to do it within the time frame of your re-inspection rate. But like, if you want,
I've got trees that are on my list from 2019 that I still go look at.
No, definitely. But like, for argument's sake, like if Dom's suggested he goes back and looks at a tree in 3 years' time, but wants to just a branch, prune, whatnot, you've got to have that between your time frame and time frame of re-inspection.
It would be, I agree with you in the sense, yeah. So it's ideal. The ideal sites to go to are when the client gets everything done between your inspections. There's no doubt about that, because your next inspection's a pushover. but I'm also aware that not everyone's got a budget that's as luxurious as we would like it to be. And then I see arborists do things like, oh, well, the tree's got 1 centimetre dead branches, and $50,000 worth of pruning later. The schools no branches of 1 centimetre in diameter. And I don't know how you, well, I do. I know that dead branches of that sort of size has to fall with 5 ninjas. The 5 ninja theory is falls with 5 ninjas attached. 4 of the ninjas hold the person down on the ground. The 5th one sharpens the end of the branch and starts stabbing the person to death. And I know that because I'm a bad man. When I climb trees, back in the old days, no high vis, and we did have helmets, we did have earmuffs, and the guys ran that chipper constantly, and you couldn't hear them, you couldn't get them, and you'd get frustrated, and you'd cut a branch, and it wasn't uncommon to cut a branch that was 5 or 6 or 7 centimeters in diameter and throw it at the ground crew to get their attention. And every now and again, you'd get a good hit. And I have never put a guy into even getting a stitch. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't do it from there. I'm just saying, think about how many things fall and how many times that happens on a site. And if I ask arborists this question during a training program, there'll always be 10 or 20% that say, yeah, I've done that. There's always, 15, 20%, something like that say, yep, I've done that, and I'm throwing branches at the guys and I've hit them. I'm not going to ask you to commit to it, but I'm telling you I have, and I know that there's hundreds of other arborists that have done that, and people survive. So 1 centimetre dead branches, and nothingness. If we're looking at that path that Niels was walking past with that limb that was over, that was flattening out in one spot, I might be inclined to say, look, I think I worked that out to about a 1 in 30,000 or something. That's something that probably is worth prioritising. I think he gets about $2,000 in budget from my calculations to cover the cost of dealing with that over a 10-year period. So when he does that, though, Darren, is not up to me to tell him. He knows he's got to do it. It's essential. And if it's essential, he gets to do it. It's like you're saying to you, look, it's essential that you get your brakes inspected. Yeah?
Yeah, definitely. But
I'm not going to tell you.
You're passing on your knowledge and whatnot to the client, whether they, and I get where you're coming from, as in budget wise and whatnot, but it's basically up to them if it's been approved that,
If I say that's essential, it means I expect you to do that. If I say it's optional, do it when you can afford it, my car needs a clean. That's optional. It's a maintenance issue that doesn't need to be done straight away. I know that if I don't clean it frequently enough, it's going to affect the Duco. So at some stage or other, I'm going to pay the price for that.
Definitely.
But I, as a car owner, make that decision.
Yeah.
If I imagine taking my car down to Mazda and having them say, "Oh, Mark, I'm sorry, this car needs cleaning and it needs cleaning in the next week." What would I say to the guy? The other thing is, we pick terms like a week, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. Well, if it needs to be done in 1 week, that means the risk must be 50 times greater than it needs to be done in a year. And a yearly risk threshold, if I'm using a quantified system under the tolerability of risk framework, is something that's smaller than 1 in a million. So for 50 times higher than that, it's a 1 in 2,000 risk. Is that right? 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000. So one in 20,000, that's probably the car. And if it was 1 in 1,000, well, then that would only be 10 times higher. So I got it done in 5 weeks. Over that 5-week period, it would be equal to the risk of a tree over a year. So, the other point that goes with that, Darren, is we almost never see trees in that unacceptable range. What we see is trees that go into that range that are rocking in the ground or something, they just become immediate removals. We don't even think about it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Like
and-
you go back to
Cool.
stuff that you've been to 2 years previous, and it's still not done. You're just providing your advice to a client, or as you know, my electricity network, and they it's still not done. It's up to you're putting the onus back on them. You know what I mean?
You guys know that it's wrong. You know there's a problem.
Yeah,
You know you
so-
can do something. And if you want to go out and spend things, but there's a funny audio skit on this very subject. And so what? We take money from the person's heating bill and they freeze to death, or do we take money from their electricity bill and they cook to death during summer, or they get their water cut off? We're not in that situation. If I said to you, boy, you're going to have to go spend $10,000 on your truck tomorrow, that's going to be a different thing than, hey, you've got some expenses coming up, just deal with them, and the sooner you deal with them, the better for you. But, it's probably not going to make a huge difference over the next year or two. That's a real different way of communicating. And I think we often say, I want it done in a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, in part because we don't want to wear the responsibility. We're worried about what's going to happen to us. And the reality is nothing. For a starter, 5 people are killed by trees a year. Now, we're not going to get into serious injuries as well, but we'll just look at deaths, versus 60 people killed by beds every year. And I still want to know the name of the profession that inspects beds.
I thought it was chairs that were the big killers.
I know chairs kill less people than beds, more people than trees. Mortality rate from chairs in Australia, in I think it was 2015, sat at about 1 in a million. But again, that's just such a small number. Now, as a result, I know every time I stand on a chair, and anyone else ever stood on a chair, you can be honest. When I stand on a chair, I think, yep, I know what I'm doing. I'm just coming into that risk category. I'm increasing it.
My chairs say get off me when I stand on them.
Yeah. Well, I have it hard enough getting up onto them. That's a big step. So, I look at it from that point of view. So that's how I would handle time frames. I would simply say, this stuff must be done. And then the rest, basically cutting out that dead branch that's 15 centimetres in diameter that's the back corner of the property, probably doesn't matter at all. They know it's there. They know they shouldn't be out there during a storm. I've done all that they need to do. They then make the rest of the decision. Okay, well, I've got some money, the car's taken care of, the electricity bill's paid, I can now do some tree work. And I think one of the advantages of that approach is we're teaching people to like trees again rather than fear them. I think our profession, since I started, has gone from doing things to retain trees, and we did crazy things, to now trying to fear people into it. And when you're afraid of something, you're not going to spend money and you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Rob? Dom, sorry.
Yeah, it does. And look, just to tie it off, just that other little bit I mentioned, when making my definitions for work priority, do I need to base them on another resource, or can I make up appropriate definitions myself?
You can make up appropriate definitions. Every one of those definitions is mine. There will be an Australian standard for tree risk. I don't know what it's going to say. What it's not going to do is select a particular method, but it may well look at some of those language terms. And I would be more than happy for the standard to adopt that sort of terminology of work that is essential. If I looked at the Work Health and Safety Act, the Work Health and Safety Act in every state, I think, except Victoria, adopts that sort of language of broadly acceptable, generally acceptable, tolerable, and in the tolerable it breaks into tolerable and as low as reasonably practicable, and just straight tolerable, and then unacceptable. Obviously, stuff that's unacceptable needs to be prioritised before work that is acceptable. And again, I'll share that with you. I've got a lovely little phrase that we use in that. It's important to keep in mind that maintenance work can be performed at any time a tree crew is working on the site in the next few years or so. Is not urgent or essential work. And then somewhere else is a little phrase that says, when choosing to do maintenance work, choose to do the areas that are in the highest use, work that's in the highest use areas first.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, because the reason I asked about backing up my definition was just thinking, you know, if for whatever reason my report somehow ends up in court and I get asked, what did you use to make these definitions? I just thought if I said to the judge, I'm supposedly an expert, so I made them up myself, might not be a good enough excuse.
I think what I would say is I decided how to communicate it, because that's a part of my job as an expert, is to communicate something that's complex as simply as I can so the end consumer can use it. And in that, I took into light the fact that whilst the consequences of tree failures can be severe, the likelihood is extremely small, and that a person may have competing needs and expenses. Now, I know that none of you have clients like that. All of your clients are so cashed up that if you say go spend $20,000 on a tree, they do it. They've got money pouring out of their pockets. But most people I deal with, most organisations I deal with, have restrictions. I know that because when I was teaching, and Peter will shake his head and say yes, when I was teaching, there's a component of the diploma material that tells us that a RTA should have microscopes, and I was forever surprised that a number of the RTOs didn't have microscopes and didn't use microscopes, including mine. I had to bring them into class. So it gets to a stage where you shake your head and you think, you know, there are competing demands. And, you know, I would say I'd be just as happy with most schools getting inspected every 5 years, for example, every caravan park 5 years, unless there was a tree of concern that I thought was going to change faster than that. And I'd far rather that money be spent on anti-bullying programs. I'd be far better, happier with that money being spent on tree awareness programs. And I think you'd probably end up with a better end result. So that's that balancing side. Is the way I'm doing it the best way? Am I using the resources? And every client I have is limited budget and competing demands. And I think that's something that we as arborists tend to forget. One of the things we do as arborists to get around this is we tell people that someone's going to die. For sure. If you don't do that in 2 weeks' time, little Johnny's going to be dead. The problem with it is people that deal with trees regularly, like people in government departments, eventually just go numb to that. And they know that it's codswallop. And I go out to schools at the moment that were inspected a year ago where the arborist has said remove trees within 1 week and the tree's still there. And I think, boy, it's so lucky that something that dangerous stayed there for 50 times longer than they suggested. You know, probably a smarter option. And the one I can think of from today, 2 100mm diameter stems 6 meters high. I mean, my comments were this tree is never going to pose a risk that's unacceptable and never be tolerable or being as low as reasonably practicable. It's going to crumble over time. It's definitely not a risk issue.
Yep.
So it's trying to balance that up. If we keep on describing trees as dangerous and they're going to kill you and everyone's going to die, the dilemma will become that when we go to the court, it's going to be hard to change the perception that we've promulgated. If we say the risk of trees is where it is, here are the facts, that's a lot easier just to simply say I did what was reasonable because the risk was small, identified anything that's unacceptable or not as low as reasonably practicable, and I gave you some maintenance work as well. I picked the maintenance work that I thought was the most pressing, and that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, look, thanks for that. I do like your approach of not having time frames, because that will, and I'll experiment with that, because there are a couple of trees where I thought you could so easily justify low or medium, and it's almost like you want to create another category to go in between, and then because like one time seemed like a little too long, but the other time, whereas just by getting rid of the time frame entirely and just say whether it has to be done,
needs to be done or not need to be done. That's right.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they will decide. Oh, look. Now, don't take it the wrong way. If I saw a tree that was rocking in the ground, I would ask for the area to be isolated. I saw a 12 centimetre broken branch dangling from a cashew end the other day at a school farm. And I said, until such times as it is removed, isolate the area immediately below the branch. That's it.
Yeah, I do that stuff when I
Yeah, well, then
I just
I
call
can leave it till it falls.
Well, that's
I
right.
don't even need to remove it, do I, Dom?
No, that's right.
And so it's that process of communicating. Yep, you could get it cut out. You probably should get cut out, but until you get that done, isolate, because that's just getting. And the risk there wasn't that the risk was high. The risk there was a simple solution: isolate, that took that risk from, tolerable and maybe not up to being completely acceptable in one simple process that cost next to nothing. Isolate.
Yep.
Okay. Hopefully that helps give some perspective, and it'll be interesting to see
does.
what the committee comes up with for the Stands Australia standard on tree risk. But as I said, I think that the timeframe one will be, all of it will be controversial. It'll probably take us 2 years to get there. I dread the thought.
Are they updating the tree risk assessment MIS?
Once that's done, then the MIS will get updated to align with that.
I don't think so. I think the MIS is going to be the way it is now for until something major changes.
I might have misheard you. What are they updating?
Oh, sorry, the Stands Australia standard. We're producing, so EVO 18 is the committee, has agreed to look at an Australian standard for tree risk assessment, and it will look at things like what should be in a risk assessment, what shouldn't be in a risk assessment, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. And so that concept of giving a horribly confined time frame may be something that you see not in the standard. It may be something you see in the standard. I suspect that it won't be. I suspect that it'll address it more in the lines of what I've suggested here. But we're governed by individuals who have opinions, and arborists are very opinionated. As David Evans most eloquently said, when two arborists agree, one of them must be wrong. Okay. So you will always get this conflict within things. And that's why we're not going to try and use a method. So we're not going to look at saying you've got to use this particular method to do or that particular method. But for example, if you use track, I would expect you to follow the published literature. If you want to deviate from it, I expect you to follow the published literature and explain the deviation as well. That is, you both give the published results and the deviated results. Why? Because I think that's good communication scientifically. And so it'll be things like that I think you'll see in the standard. Maybe not, but I suspect so. Things like this tree is dangerous, and I've seen that in a report before the court, and shook my head and thought, seriously, no one's going to believe that. Because the commissioner hearing the case believed it. I shook my head again. I thought, no, it needs to say more than it's dangerous. You need to tell me what is likely to fail, what it's likely to fail onto, and what sort of consequences going to cause, because that's the essential component of risk. To say it's dangerous is simply say it's a tree.
Yep.
You know, if it's a tree, well, now there's a point to which that's true, but that's just so far from the truth from a risk perspective that it's just disingenuous in my mind. So, I wish I would say that that's an uncommon occurrence, but I commonly see people come out with a result from a risk assessment, and I don't know what part they're worried about falling, or whether they're worried about the whole tree falling. I don't know what target they were thinking of. I don't know how often they think the target was going to be there. All of that information is missing in the communication. And I think if you're going to do a written report, it certainly should include that material. And my personal view is, if you're going to do a risk assessment, it should always be in writing.